Hello everyone and welcome to the 2018 Provincial Candidates Debate for the riding of Timmins, hosted by the Timmins Chamber of Commerce, in partnership with Near North Productions, Eastlink, and mytimminsnow.com. For those of you watching via live stream on the web at www.yourplacetowatch.com, thank you for joining us virtually. My name is Jamie Clark, and I'm the president of the Chamber, which is a non-partisan organization dedicated to making our city and our province the best possible place to do business. This city and this is why we are proud to help bring to tonight's debate, which allows you to better understand the policy and platforms of the candidates that they're seeking to represent you in government. We believe firmly that your vote should be an educated vote. This is an important opportunity to ask questions that matter to you as residents of the city of Timmins. To help explain how you'll be able to do just that, I'll now introduce tonight's bilingual moderator, Cheryl Saint-Amour.
Thank you, Jamie. My name is Cheryl Saint-Amour, and I will serve as a moderator for these proceedings. Your participating candidates today are in alphabetical order per their last name: Mickey Auger, the Ontario Liberal Party; Joseph Bauer, the Ontario Libertarian Party; Gilles Bisson, Ontario New Democratic Party; Yvan Génier, Ontario PC Party; and Gary Schaap, Northern Ontario Party. All candidates have been advised of the time limits, which are as follows. Each candidate will be allowed a 3-minute opening statement, with the order having been previously determined by a random draw. Candidates will also be permitted a 2-minute closing statement to occur in reverse order from the opening. Answering questions will rotate as per the opening, and candidates will have 1 minute to respond to questions. The other candidates will then be given 30 seconds for a response, though some additional open debate may be permitted at my discretion. Keitha Robson, who's a Chamber CAO, will notify candidates when their time is expiring. These questions include written questions submitted by the audience. Should you have a specific question you would like answered, you may write it on the piece of paper that was offered to you as you came in, and submit it to Chamber staff who are posted by the door. I'm just trying to look if I see any. So they are at the front by the door. So if you want to, you can go out and submit your question there. If you didn't pick up one as you came in, they would be happy to provide one to you. They will then collect your questions and filter them through me as the evening goes on. So if you realize that you want to ask a question, didn't submit one at the beginning, you can go submit one to them, and then they'll filter it through me throughout the proceedings. The Chamber has also prepared questions of concern to its business members, and the public has been invited to submit questions by email and by telephone over the last week. Please note that due to time restrictions, not all questions will be able to be asked. Before we begin, please turn off your cell phone ringer or set it to vibrate. I would like to thank each candidate for agreeing to participate today. And with that, I'd like to ask our candidates to present their opening statement. Due to the results of the random draw, Joseph Bauer will begin. Mr. Bauer?
Hello, my name is Joseph Bauer. I'm excited to be here today as your representative for the Ontario Libertarian Party in the upcoming election. Today I'm asking you to vote for me. I've lived in this area for over 13 years now, and I love it as much today as when I first came here. My past work experience has put me directly in contact with the public, allowing me to hear your views on a variety of issues. I decided to run in this election because it's time that the government stops spending your money in such a way that it doesn't benefit you. It's time for you all to say, where's my fair share? Because you haven't seen it in quite some time. Tonight, you're going to hear from my fellow candidates on how they want to help you. What they won't want to talk about is how much it's going to cost you. I'm going to tell you about sensible options. With a provincial debt currently at $311.6 billion and rising, Ontario has the highest non-sovereign debt in the world. You should first know where and how these election promises are going to be paid for, and then decide whether or not you're willing to float the bill. From democratic reform to hydro, jobs, youth, and education and healthcare, we have concrete ideas that make sense even at the most fundamental levels. I won't say that all the ideas that my opponents have are bad. I will say from a financial perspective that there's always a price tag to them. We have to come to a fork in the road. And as voters, you need to decide which way to travel. Continue on the current path with increased debt, or take a new path that involves getting the province strong and thriving again. Northern Ontario has so much going for it, yet Queen's Park, for the most part, wants to stand in the way of our progress, plus limit an ability to grow, thrive, and prosper. Every day, further regulations and rules are being put in place that tie your hands just a little bit more. Individual rights are being eradicated so that the rights of special interest groups that pay governments millions of dollars can be forced through legislation. I won't stand for that, and neither should you. The Libertarian Party is very clear in our message. We want you to have choices, including non-government options, so that you can make up your own minds about what's best for you. Your healthcare system is breaking, your mental health care system is broken, and your hydro is leaving you broke. Are we done yet? Don't we deserve to have things that work and work well for us? In case you're wondering, the answer to that is yes. I am Joseph Bauer, and I am going to fight for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Gary Schaap, Northern Ontario Party.
Hi. Yes, my name is Gary Schaap, and I am representing the Northern Ontario Party here in Timmins. And my goal is to bring more equality to the Timmins riding. Have you never wondered why, when Mr. Bisson has made a vote, or when another party member has made a vote, and you're scratching your head going, I would never vote that way, or there's no way that makes sense. That doesn't benefit Timmins. So our party goal is to bring that forward and say, no, we are going to let you, the people of Timmins, decide how you're going to vote or represent. I'm sorry, I'm freezing here. Represent Timmins. And that means I am going to give you guys the opportunity to hear what the bills are going to be for passed, how they're going to be presented, the pros and the cons of these bills, and then I'm going to bring it to the people of Timmins, and I'm going to ask you, people of Timmins, how would you feel, or how do you want this? Do you want this bill? Do you not want this bill? Does this benefit you? And then you guys get to decide how I vote at Queen's Park. Because our party is mandated to ask you, the people of Timmins, how you feel. Whereas with the other parties here, they are not mandated. They are actually mandated to follow what their leader says. And if their leader says for them to vote a certain way, that is how they will vote. If they are told to put a certain bill forward, that's the bill they will put forward. We will not do that. We will talk to the people of Timmins. We will ask what you want, and that is what we're going to fight for. At each riding that we represent, these are what we will do. So, thank you for your time.
And now we'll hear from Yvan Génier, Ontario PC Party.
Friends, mes amis, messieurs, good evening, bonsoir. I'm honored to be here tonight to bring long-awaited change and to return jobs and prosperity to Timmins. And after this debate, I hope to have earned your vote, but more importantly, I hope to have earned your trust. It's time. In the last 15 years, were you ever forced to ask yourself which bill would be more important to pay to avoid a utility shutoff or even to avoid being sent to collections? Is there more month at the end of your money? Some people in this city, unfortunately, have to go through this every month. Why, you ask? 15 years ago, voters handed control of the province and our finances to the Liberal Party of Ontario. In that time, they have managed to increase our provincial debt to over $348 billion. That is the same as saying that each man, woman, and child of Ontario, in fact, all of us here tonight, are now on the hook to pay $23,000 each to pay off the provincial Liberal debt. Did you know that we pay over $1 billion per month only to cover interest on our existing debt, and that this is going directly in the hands of international bondholders and private bankers? The Liberal policies, scandals, and failed programs have wasted money that could have paid for more nurses and teachers and frontline workers. And this has been largely supported by Mr. Bisson and his NDPs all these years. In fact, they plan to and will borrow even more making the debt even larger. Compound interest, my friends, look it up. Of course, my fellow candidates are going to try to convince you that the Ontario PC Party is going to slash nursing jobs, fire teachers, close hospitals, and close schools, and that painful cuts are on the way when, in fact, what we want to do is fix the broken finances of this province and use those funds to hire more nurses, more teachers, and more frontline workers. I repeat my leader's commitment, no layoffs. So the next time you get your hydro bill, the next time you fill up your pickup truck to the tune of $140 per tank, and yes, it's a reality in Northern Ontario, most of us drive trucks. The next time you find the price of everything is going up because of the Liberal cap-and-trade carbon tax, you need to speak up and say that you have had enough of Liberal mismanagement, of taxes being applied to everything, of not being able to make ends meet. But you know what? No sense in telling Mr. Bisson here. He had no influence over the parties in power. Et si vous pensez que les libéraux dépensent votre argent sans s'inquiéter des conséquences, attendez de voir ce que l'NDP va vous réserver. Attendez de voir le pétrin dans lequel on va se retrouver. Souvenez-vous des Bob Ray Days? Attachez votre portefeuille, mes amis, parce qu'on s'en va pour une méchante ride.
Thank you, Mr. Génier.
Thank you very much.
We'll now hear opening remarks from Mickey Auger, Ontario Liberal Party.
Good evening. My name is Mickey Auger. I'm the Liberal candidate for the provincial election on June 7th, 2018. I came to Timmins in 1975 to start my career as a police officer with the Timmins Police. During my 30 years as a police officer, I've seen this community like none other, high and low. I've witnessed mental health, homelessness, and addiction. I've connected with all kinds of people in my 30 years. I've been living in Timmins ever since. This community became my home and my life. My family lives here. My daughter and son and my grandchildren live in South Porcupine. That is the best thing of all. Timmins has unique needs. I've learned about these as a policeman and as a board director for the Timmins Native Friendship Center. It is a fact that we don't have the service access to the services of the Southern Ontario. My mental health struggle happened many years ago when I was on a job. I ended up going away for a period of time, and then when I came back, I took counseling for about 3 years. Without that professional counseling, I don't even know if I'd be here today. But we have to have the services to deal with the mental health and the addiction of the people of this community. Make sure we have equal access to services, healthcare, and education. Everyone agrees the roads are bad in Timmins. We need money for infrastructure and for finally meet all the stuff that we need, bridges, etc. As the basis of my campaign is you, the people in the form of my community. I look at everyone, especially the young, the seniors, and the programs. On June 7th, elect someone who will focus on services, healthcare and education, infrastructure, and of course, our people of our community. And I'm not running for myself, I'm running for the people. That's it.
Thank you. And now opening remarks from Gilles Bisson, Ontario New Democratic Party.
Well, thank you. Merci tout le monde pour être ici ce soir. It's good that we participate in this process so that people can make up their minds based on what the candidates have to say. I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for organizing this. They always do a good job, and for the media in covering this particular event. In this particular debate, we're in the campaign period, and of course, all of us are going to be putting up our elbows, and we're going to be somewhat political in regards to trying to put forward what we think is best, and at times we'll be somewhat partisan, and that's okay. That's what happens in elections. But the job of an NPP is not what happens in elections, it's what happens after. And it's about working with organizations and working with government and working with opposition parties in order to be able to make things happen. And I've been very lucky because we have some really good people in this community. People at Northern College that have been putting forward really good, strong proposals in order to fund things like a brand new trade center, which we funded in this community. Brand new training center for firefighters that currently is being built in this community. That didn't happen just because it happened on its own. It happened because Northern College put forward a good application. It was supported by the city of Timmins. It was supported by many community groups and supported by myself, and we worked together in order to be able to move that forward. We've been fortunate, and I will give the Wynne government some credit. I've worked with them in order to be able to get some funding in order to fund a family health team in South Porcupine, a family health team in Timmins, a family health team in Kapuskasing, a family health team in Hearst, and now a community francophone health center in Timmins, which we've been working on for 3 years. Did that happen because of me alone? Absolutely not. It happened because the community got together and we worked together as New Democrats, Liberals, and Conservatives in order to do what was right for our community. And then we went and lobbied. In some cases, more times than not, we lobby the government, but we also work with the Tory opposition and New Democrats in order to put these ideas and these issues on the radar. So elections are about partisanship. Being a member is about working with those people that are there in order to make sure that we're able to deliver the things that people need in our communities. And I'm proud of my record of being able to work with everybody from hospitals to community groups to colleges and universities and others to be able to deliver what is important to our community. This whole fallacy, we didn't get nothing in 28 years. Give me a break. Look around. Look in this particular auditorium. All of these things happen. Why? Not just because of me. It happened because of people like Sylvia Gravel. It happened because of Sylvain Lacroix. It happened because of Fred out at Northern College, Mr. Gibbons. It happened for all of those people coming together. And together we will continue to succeed because that's how you get things done, is by working together. Thank you.
All right, we will start with the questions now, and the first question will go to Mr. Schaap. Given the crucial economic role played by Northern Ontario's natural resource industry, what steps would you take to support resource development?
Our party would be looking into find how to keep the money within Northern Ontario. We would also be looking at more efficient ways of mining, more efficient ways of doing forestry, more towards the select cut, more ways to also harvest the forest afterwards. Did you know there are over 80 plants that are actually medicinal and food related that are in the forest at any given time that could be used for economic reasons in order to grow the natural resources? So we don't need to just simply harvest the lumber. We can also harvest the food within the forest and use that as well to keep the forest sustainable and let the trees grow longer. So that way we have a more robust bush and evergreens.
Thank you. Mr. Genier, I'll ask that you not clap after every answer. Thank you. Mr. Genier?
Well, actually, you know what? I mean, what the PC government wants to do, what the Ontario PC government wants to do, is to cut red tape. Right now, in order to be able to get permits or to develop mining or forestry or anything like that, there's a permit process that takes forever. The red tape is amazing in that. You know, and then we want to avoid having to go to different, like to 50 committees and wait 2 years, 3 years. We want to make sure that the money is brought here. And if we're on the side of power, I know you said that that's not working, but I'm convinced that if we are on the side of power, the money will flow much faster, much easier, and we will get mines open again. We will get forestry open again. We will have resource-based enterprises that will bring jobs to Timmins and make sure that we can get prosperous again.
Thank you. Mr. Auger?
Well, I think myself, the process, the way they're doing it now is not bad, because I worry about the environment. The animals, the fish and all this stuff. And we start going too fast with the permits, you're gonna start polluting the water, and the animals are gonna suffer, and I don't think that's right. There's a reason why it takes a long time for permits to come through. And when you start cutting trees in the bush, like acres and acres, and then all of a sudden in the fall you have moose hunting. The moose have no place to hide. They're in the open and they get right there and get shot right away. So I think the reason for the permits, I think it's a good thing. They should keep going, take their time, and make sure that when they do it, it's for the environment process to keep everything going.
Thank you. Mr. Bisson?
Well, I listened to my colleague, my friend from the Conservative Party, saying he wants to cut red tape. This from a leader who says he's going to jump on a bulldozer and bulldoze a road all the way up to the Ring of Fire. I wonder how Wibbequay, Martin Falls, and every other First Nations community is going to deal with that when all of a sudden somebody decides to jump on a bulldozer and drive through all of the red tape. Listen, I agree with you to a degree. We need to make sure that the process is streamlined, but you need to have in place regulation and you need to have in place rules in order to make sure that we protect the interest of all citizens. And that's citizens from First Nations, non-First Nations, and also people living in different parts of this province. The other thing that we need to do, and this is a huge issue, is what's happened in forestry. We need to tie forestry licenses to communities. No more should we be allowed to shut down a mill and that the wood in a place like Smooth Rock Falls or Timmins or Hearst is all of a sudden shipped to a mill somewhere afar, and the local community is not able to benefit from the wood in their own area. One of the things that we would do as New Democrats is make sure that the wood tenure process respects communities and allows people to be able to keep those jobs closer to home.
Thank you, Mr. Bisson. Mr. Bauer?
In reaction to this one, yes, I agree with both the PC as well as with Gilles. There is too much red tape. In Ontario alone, we have over 380,000 rules that govern our everyday lives. Yeah, we need to cut back on that. Now, in regards to the natural resources, I think what we also need to do is we need to look at secondary and tertiary resources. So when we're looking at the gold mines that play such an important role up here, one of the natural byproducts that you're going to find is quartz. Why are we not doing anything with quartz manufacturing? If you look at quartz countertops, they go for what? $15,000, $20,000 for a tabletop? Why can we not have a quartz manufacturing facility up here? Just saying, something to think about.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Genier. How do you propose Timmins ensures it receives its fair share of provincial funding for programs, services, and infrastructure?
Again, if we're on the same side as whoever's in power in Toronto, at Queen's Park, we know that we will be listened to. There's a difference between having funding come in naturally and from from the due process. But there's also funding that comes in from application base. And for the people that apply for funding and they're not on the right side of power, it's like going to Canadian Tire, I suppose, or owning Canadian Tire and running out of lawn chairs and going to Walmart to borrow some chairs to sell in your store. They're not gonna agree with you. They're gonna send you on your way. And so You know what, I mean, if you go to Queen's Park and you're not on the same team as whoever's holding the money bags, you're not gonna get nothing, or it's gonna take a long, long while, as we've seen for many different projects.
Mr. O'Shea?
Well, one part I think what you have to do is if the Liberals or the NDP or the PCs are in power, you have to have a representative here. But you also have to have a person that can speak up and ask, where's the money for the north? Because all our money is going down south. We need roads to be fixed and repaired. And you make deals with the other leaders or whatever, and you try and work something out. You work as a team to get things done for your community. And because sometimes you might not get the representative in power with the government, but you got to learn to work together to get things done. And sometimes a little bit of politeness or whatever, you might be able to get it. But you got to be able to communicate and talk to certain people in order to get what you need.
Mr. Bisson?
Well, I think my colleagues are starting to figure it out that you do have to work together. You can't go there as a partisan. You have to work as Liberals, you Democrats and Conservatives together to be able to deliver what happened, in order to be able to deliver. And you got to work with those people that are there. And that's what I pride myself on. I've been able to do that over the years. You look just down the street, Collège Boréal, Université de Hearst. That was funded by a Liberal government. It wasn't a government member on the government side who delivered that. It was our community that delivered that. Why? Because they had a very strong proposal. So that's what we ended up doing. And to my friend from the Conservative side, be careful of polls. You may be somewhat surprised at the end of this election.
Mr. Bauer?
If you don't mind, could I get the question one more time? I was
Certainly
kind
can. How do you propose Timmins ensures it receives its fair share of provincial funding for programs, services, and infrastructure?
So, contrary to Mr. Genier over here, who rather emphasized the strong arm, our way or the highway method, it is really what Mr. Bisson is saying. It is a collaborative effort. We have to look at what programs and services are the essential programs and services. Now, everybody is going to have different viewpoints on that, but when we look at what the essential services are, obviously those need to take a priority. So, for example, mental health, that's a priority within this province. We all know that. That's something that needs to be followed through on. And that would be the way that I would be looking at that, is in the priority method and in the collaborative method at Queen's Park.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shaw?
Sorry. Can you repeat the question again?
Certainly. How do you propose Timmins ensures it receives its fair share of provincial funding for programs, services, and infrastructure?
Well, I have to also agree that we would need to work within the other parties in order to bring around that kind of funding. Also, I believe that we should also give a say to the people of Timmins on what they want by going to the people of Timmins and asking them, instead of just making assumptions or having our leader tell us what they want. I believe that's the main way to go. I do believe working and having connections with people is the right way to go about doing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Third question, we'll start with Mr. Auger. Businesses throughout Timmins and indeed Ontario are currently struggling to find staff to fill jobs. What measures would you take to help ensure businesses are better able to connect with the workers they require, including adjustment of apprenticeship ratios?
Well, first of all, the apprenticeship ratio, as I believe, is handled through a board or something down south, and the schools are not involved with that, apparently. My understanding is if a person applies to Northern College or Cambrian College for electrical or mechanical, they should be able to apply. Once they get accepted, apply to the school for apprenticeship and let the school find out if they can get one. And if they do get one, the school is the best place to find out where they can get workers, the apprentices into school, into the workforce, on apprenticeship. And businesses, I think, have to do is, it's a generation that I've seen. Kids want paychecks, but they don't want to work. And you have to make it attractive for the young people to go in and work. And they're getting $14 an hour, and next year they're going to get 15.
That's time, Mr. Auger. I need to move on to Mr. Bisson, please.
My daughter is here and she wants to work. I quite frankly don't agree that young people don't want to work. What young people want is an opportunity to get the training necessary to be able to get the jobs that they want. And that's why one of the things that we're saying in this platform is that we will move from a loan system to a grant system for people who want to go off to post-secondary education. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as far as apprenticeship ratios, I was an apprentice. I worked in a system that had no ratios. I worked at the McIntyre mine. That's where I did my apprenticeship. And we were like 8 or 9 apprentices to one journeyman. Let me tell you, that wasn't a very good training environment. You need an environment where people are properly trained to get the skills that they need so that they can work safe and they can produce for the employer. The last part is we really need to look at immigration in a way that looks at what we did here in Timmins back in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, where we welcomed people from abroad to come and work in the mines, to take the jobs that were there that we couldn't fill. And one of the things we need to look at is how are we able to support employers in order to be able to make sure that we have a good immigration policy that allows people to get into the workplace.
Thank you. Mr. Bauer?
So when we're looking at the jobs, I think first of all what we need to do is we need to take a step back and look at what we can do for the employer. So one of the things that we're standing on is the absolving of corporate tax rate. Employers are already paying HST, they're paying their CPP, they're paying their EI. Why are we making them pay corporate tax? By eliminating corporate tax for companies, you're offering them that extra revenue in which they can hire more people. Okay, that's your first step. When we're looking at the apprenticeships, what we want to do is we want to revoke the mandatory registration with the College of Trades. So if you don't want to register with it, why should you? What is the College of Trades genuinely offering you that our trade unions aren't offering? So those are just a few of the steps that we're going through to ensure that our employees and the youth are going to have opportunities in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Schaap?
Yeah, when it comes to apprenticeships, I believe that it should be through the schools. The schools would have an idea on what the demand is in the area. And I also believe that the apprenticeships should be on the workforce for 2 reasons. One, I've worked as a miner. I've worked on the drilling rigs. I've handled the dynamite. And I've also controlled all the gears and all the boom going up and down and all the fun stuff. And had I been trained properly, there might not have been a few accidents that other people have done. Now, you're saying that they'd be trained on the proper equipment. 9 times out of 10, I have noticed that the proper equipment that the school will train you with is not the same equipment you're going to encounter in the workforce. So if the school is going to offer a program that involves trades, electricity, or whatever, then the people should be trained to work with the equipment that they're going to be handling out in the job. That's why I believe the school should be the one looking and setting these people up with a safe work environment, with a safe employee that has gone through and has been able to be credited through the school to be properly done.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genier?
In the same avenue as my friend here, you know what? I was a funeral director for 9 years, and when I studied in that course, there was a 1-year placement, 1 year, we'll call it an apprenticeship, if you will, to become licensed in that job, in that career. And again, as you said, I'll tell you that 90% of what I learned in class, which is the history of this and the history of that and whatever, does not necessarily apply to techniques of embalming or techniques of dealing with the people. And I believe very much that apprenticeships are needed. We absolutely need to work on the funding to make sure that, to encourage the plumbers and the electricians in town, to maybe encourage them in getting an apprentice working for them so that they can learn, right in the trade.
Thank you. Mr. Bisson will start this next question. So this question comes from the grade 8 students out of Gorman Intermediate Catholic School who have been learning about the upcoming provincial elections through the Student Vote Program and will hold a vote at their school on June 5th. Their class has decided on the one question that they would like the candidates to consider. So here's the question.
These are normally the tough ones.
As we follow the campaign trail for each of the parties, there seems to be a lot of discussion about what will be done to better the lives of people living in Southern Ontario. We realize that the majority of voters are located in the southern part of our province. However, the struggles Northerners have with hydro and gas prices in particular are unique to those living in Northern Ontario and should not be overshadowed by the rest of the province. If elected, how will each of the candidates ensure that the unique needs of residents in the Timmins riding are represented in the legislature?
Listen, that's the problem we all suffer as Northerners, is that we have 10 seats or 9 seats, depending how you count it, to the rest of the GTHA, which is probably around, 70, somewhere around 70 seats. And it's an issue. And what you need to do as a political party, and I think every party has tried, in fairness, the Conservatives, New Democrats, Liberals, along with the other 2 parties that are here, to develop policy that speaks to the needs of Northern Ontario. So for example, one of the things that we talk about is making sure that we end privatization of winter road maintenance, that we actually go back and clean our highways the way that we used to before. That's why we're proposing that, in fact, we bring back the Ontario Northland to Northern Ontario. Why should you invest in transportation infrastructure in the major cities of Toronto and then shut down a rail service in Northern Ontario? I think that's the wrong way to go. That's why we're saying that we need to make sure that we put in place the type of supports that people need to be able to build a strong economy here in Northern Ontario by supporting initiatives that allows that to happen. And as New Democrats, we understand that well.
Thank you. Mr. Bauer?
Another portion of this would be the hydro question that they're asking about in regards to the day-to-day living. Well, everybody here pretty much has, I do believe it's a general consensus that we're all going to cut the hydro bills. On top of that, what the Libertarian Party intends to do is we're going to eliminate your time of usage charge or billing and the delivery cost. It's ridiculous that you're paying a delivery cost that's either equal to or higher than your actual hydro bill. Whoever thought of that brilliant idea? And then finally, the one that just drives me insane is the debt reconciliation payment that we pay in our hydro bills. Why are we paying for their bad decisions? It's got to get off the books. There's no way that we should be paying for that. So by taking those first few steps, I think that we're ensuring a healthier and a more prosperous growth here in Northern Ontario.
Thank you. Mr. Schaap?
Yeah, when it comes to the hydro, we believe that, like everyone else, that the needs to be reduced. Also, we need to look at, do you know that about 60% of the hydro dams and power stations are sitting on standby in Northern Ontario alone? They're just sitting there, not doing anything, they're being manned, and they're not giving any hydro out at all. So and then the delivery charge, like the Libertarian said, is more than what we're actually using 90% of the time in hydro. So between those two things, why are we dishing out money towards more solar fields, more windmills, when we have all the hydro that we have right here, right now in Northern Ontario being produced? We don't need to produce more hydro. We have enough to run Canada. We don't need to produce more. And it's all green through hydro. So I understand that. So my question is kind of to the Liberals, why are you encouraging more use of the solar fields and all that and wind turbines when it costs more oil to run a wind turbine that produces an energy? Thank you.
Mr. Genier?
Mr. Bisson, you were the one that voted out the not the UNTC, but the railway. you didn't stand up to fight for it. And if you did, nobody listened. You know what? And as for the hydro rates, I think Mr. Ford is the only one that said that we would return the dividends to the folks. And then for industry purposes, we would make sure that corporate tax is reduced so that these companies can have, be better positioned to accept, to create new jobs. If we keep taxing and taxing and taxing these businesses, there's no way that these people are going to hire new workers. And therefore, our unemployment rate will keep going up, and as it always goes.
Mr. Genie, you attacked me. I'm so hurt.
I'm sure you are.
And I'll let you respond.
In 28 years.
Mr. Bisson, I'll let you respond to that after Mr. Auger has his comment, okay?
Well, yeah. Go ahead. You can go ahead of me. I'll let you go. Okay.
Working together.
All
right.
Well,
Mr. Auger?
you're probably right with working together because Mr. Ford is a multimillionaire. Don't give a shit about anybody else.
Mr.
But anyway,
Auger.
we'll
Mr.
go on
Auger.
that way. Anyway, the hydro bill, everybody's complaining about. Yes, it's high. But my hydro bill, I was paying $118 a month, and now it's down to $89, which is a saving about $26, $27. Hold on before you speak, okay? I know you're getting excited. But anyway, and the hydro bill should go down a little lower, but it takes time. And we also have, the Liberals are going to hire a watchdog to get control of the gas prices at the pumps because they're way too high, and then we have to control that. Anyway, that's it.
All right, Mr. Bisson, you can respond.
Well, as I was saying, Mr. Genie, you attacked me. I'm so hurt. Because I remember meeting with you in January. You came to meet with me at Fullbeard to ask to run as a new Democratic candidate. So all of a sudden, you came to ask me to run as a new Democrat. You said you liked what Charlie was doing, you liked what I was doing, and you heard that I was going to be running in the northern part of the riding, and you asked, what would I have to do to run as a new Democrat in this riding? And I told you, I says you have to become a member and you've got to be able to win a nomination. Seems to me you found a nomination, but in another party. So don't talk to me about, whatever you were talking about.
Mr. Genie, if you'd like to respond.
So, again, in cutting all those services and making sure that when you're standing up and nobody listens to
So you didn't meet with me in January?
I did meet with you.
Oh, okay.
You know
What
what?
were you asking?
Mr. Bisson, please
Actually,
allow
I
him
wanted to
continue.
meet with you. It's funny you say that, right? Because I wanted to meet with you in your office, not at a public bar, okay? And I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to talk to you about my father, who had just passed away. And by the way, you had absolutely nothing to say. All you said was, just put that in writing and just send it to me. No. That's what you said. Absolutely, I was there. No. And you know what? My sister did the same thing with your colleague, Frangelina, in Sudbury. No. And she was welcomed into her office. Frangelina wrote a report. She presented it in legislature. That's what an MPP should do.
So you didn't meet with me in January, you didn't ask to run for the new Democratic Party?
I said, what does it take to run as an MPP?
No,
I didn't mention a specific
All right,
party.
gentlemen, thank you very much.
Okay.
So I have a few questions regarding health care, so I'm going to kind of amalgamate a few of them. And we'll start with Mr. Bauer. What will your party do to address funding shortages at hospitals and for home care affecting seniors across Ontario?
Okay, so when we look at the healthcare crisis that we're in currently, what we're actually proposing is we're proposing non-government options for people. We've come into this system of hallway healthcare. It's not benefiting anybody. When you go into an emergency room and you have to wait 8 or 9 hours, there's something fundamentally wrong with that concept. So what we're saying is, instead of just having the government option available, which is wildly underfunded, and we have to look at how that funding reform has to take place. We want to offer non-government options as well. The majority of people that are working have their own private health care as well. so that you could use your OHIP as well as private healthcare to get the healthcare you need that much faster.
Thank you. Mr. Schaap?
When it comes to healthcare, I believe that the funding should be coming probably actually even from the carbon tax. Like, we spend so much money in our carbon tax that a lot of the governments don't know what to do with it. They don't know where to put the money. The Liberals even said that they don't need the carbon tax. So I'm saying, well, okay, the carbon tax is supposed to benefit the health and the environment. Well, what better place to put the money than in healthcare? So I wouldn't mind paying a little bit more on my gas if I know I'm going to have a doctor or a nurse taking care of me when I need to be taken care of. So I'm saying, why not use that? And when it comes to privatization doesn't work. Every time you privatize, all that happens is you get high rates, the doctors become wealthy, and you only see select few. So the people that really need to be seen don't get seen. So in my opinion, I would not be looking to privatize. I would still try to keep it open. I would also like to say that I would not let the NDP open up the borders on OHIP, so everyone and anyone, doesn't matter what country you're from, can come in and use our medical services, which is already taxed to the point of no return.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Schaap. Mr. Genier?
We have an issue here, Gilles and I, about le centre de santé pour les francophones at Timmins. I've been sitting on that committee for 2 years now for l'Alliance de la Francophonie, and I can tell you that we've fought for over 20 years, well, actually close to 20 years for that center, and we had to threaten to sue the government in order to get action. And it just so happens, very, very convenient, but the day Doug Ford was here, that's the day that Gilles Bisson announced that we would have a French center here, a health center. Now, to come back to the question, if we have centers as such, we're going to alleviate the burden that's on the hospital. There's going to be free beds, and that way, you know, we'll have better access to good services. For funding, I mean, we're gonna invest in mental health and addiction services to the tune of about $3.4 billion. You want to get no? Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Auger?
Repeat the question, please.
What will your party do to address funding shortages at hospitals across Ontario as well as home care?
Well, home care, I think the Liberals want to hire 3,200 home care workers so that the senior people that live in long-term can get an extra 4 hours of work done by nurses. And the hospitals should be able to, there's funding out there from the government to supply the hospitals with extra money. They're going to be spending money. I don't know the exact amount now, but I know it's up there in the millions. And they're going to be hiring 5,500 nurses in the next 4 years. And they want to build another bunch of long-term care beds for the people because the baby boomers are getting up there, and I'm one of them. So I'm looking for a king-size bed. But anyway, that's it for now.
All right, Mr. Bisson?
Mickey, maybe we can share a room.
Again.
Oh, yeah, we're working as a team.
There we go, there we go. First of all, just to say, there's a couple of things that happened. First of all, we froze funding for both home care and hospitals for 7 years. And as a result of that, our hospitals and home care have been rationing services. And that's part of the problem. And that's why Andrea Horvath and you Democrats have said, first, we need to make sure that all hospitals are funded at the rate of inflation every year, plus an adjustment for other things such as geography, heating, all of that kind of stuff, depending where you're at. And at home care, the same thing, is to make sure that people are not rationed when it comes to home care, and they can stay at the community, because if you stay in the community, it's cheaper. On to the Francophone Health Center. I just say to my friend beside me, it's a disservice to the Francophones who work so hard to suggest that the only reason this thing was Ford is because Doug Ford came to town. Like, really? Talk to Sylvain Lacroix, talk to Denis Bélanger, talk to Pierre Bélanger. You were at some of the meetings I was at. You know as well as I do that we've been working on this for a number of years, and only because the government, and I'll give the Liberals some credit, 3 years ago they announced funding for health centers, and we lined ourselves up in order to be able to get there, in order to be able to get that funded. But to say that it's only because Doug Ford came to town, I think is a disservice to the people of Timmins that worked on that for so long.
Mr. O'Shea, you'd like to respond?
Yes, Mr. Genier stated that the Liberals should have gave it to Mickey Auger nomination to announce the funding. And I think, you know, the reason was the Liberals gave $90 million to Lynn for the medical stuff in the north. Then Lynn turned around and spent the money on the Francophone Center. So it wasn't the Liberals. They gave the money to Lynn, and then Lynn turned around, spent the money, $2.3 or $4 million for the Francophone medical.
It was Helena Jackson.
Yeah, and that's it. It had, and you know what?
She approved Kapuskasing and she approved the center at Jupiter.
Yeah, so in other words, if it was me, I don't need the glory. I had my glory days in way back. It's just a matter, as long as you get something in the community, you should be happy. That's all I got to say.
Mr. Genie, did you want to respond?
You're absolutely right, Mickey, you're absolutely right. The thing is that I was just pointing out that it was very convenient that the day that Doug Ford came in, and don't get me wrong, I'm happy that this center is coming through. We're getting $2.1 million for this center. 2.1, yeah. Well, it's not you. It's not you.
Oh, it's not Doug.
All right, we will move on to the next question. Mr. Schaap, what will your party do to improve highway safety in Northern Ontario?
For one, we would actually add more side pull-offs for transport drivers to pull off, to get off the highway during a road closure or to go to sleep, because there's a lot of time that an accident or something happens on the highway and there's no place for them to pull over to rest. I would also look at maybe putting beet juice down instead of salt. It costs a little bit more, but it's healthier for the animals, and it actually is more effective and better traction for people. And it doesn't turn into ice so fast. Also, I would look at possibly adding more rumble strips to the sides, to the shoulders. There's a lot of times there's no indicators on the highway, so truckers or anyone traveling long distance doesn't always realize that they're drifting. And my final thing would be that you would have to pull over more. So I would say truckers every 2 hours would have to pull over instead of every hour, or every 3 hours, I mean. That's what I would look into.
All right, Mr. Genie,
Can you repeat the question, please?
what would your party do to improve highway safety in Northern Ontario?
Well, first of all, we'd open up the train again, the railway, because there's so many, I travel, in my current job, I travel between Moonbeam and Raymore, all the way to Chapleau, with, including Timmins, every week. And I see so many transports. It's not uncommon between Smooth Rock Falls and Driftwood to meet at least 15 transports every time, and that's a 15-mile span. Our highways are overburdened with transports. We need better training for these folks that are getting their licenses. They're coming in from all over the province. I don't know what kind of training they have, but nonetheless. And then, of course, we have to get funding out there to fix the roads, to make sure that the roads are, you know, they're safe to travel on.
Mr. O'Shea?
Well, I think what we have to do is we have to get the government to get involved in plowing the highways instead of private contractors. Because private contractors seem to think that they can come out at any time they want, and it's hard to get a hold of them. And if you have the government snow plowers working, you put them on a shift schedule and they go out there and they do their job. The problem is some of the people that drive transports don't give a shit. They go right through and they're going about 120 and an 80, whatever. And some of them are not the best drivers in the world. You got to watch it, and I would be giving them more training when they come up here in north, because I don't think they know how to drive in the wintertime in the icy roads. So we have to watch, make sure we watch who's driving them and take care of it. And like I say, get the government involved in privatizing, getting the government workers to plow the roads instead of privatization.
Mr. Bisson?
Well, privatization of winter road maintenance has been a disaster. It started with the Tories, accelerated by the Liberals. I'm glad to see that you flipped the Liberal position, and we're now going to undo the winter road maintenance.
It's a team.
It is something that needs to be done. We need to be able to bring back winter road maintenance under public control. The other thing is, and a lot of people, we live in the city of Timmins. Our roads are in pretty bad shape. But the reality is it was the Tories who decided not to fund municipalities when it comes to the maintenance of roads. Algonquin, believe it or not, is considered a street. It's not considered a highway. Why? Because Mike Harris downloaded onto the municipality. We need to find a way other than connecting Link at $3.5 million a year, which is the maximum that you can get for fixing Algonquin, to be able to find a way to bring some of those roads back up to the province where they rightly belong, and a proper connecting link funding similar to what we used to have before. Because the city of Timmins doesn't have $100 million to fix that road. The province is the one that needs to take responsibility because it is a provincial highway. It is not just a municipal road.
Mr. Bauer?
So I think we need to look at the current options that we have available. So again, as was mentioned earlier, let's get train transport up and running again. Very solid, reliable solution. That's a mass transit system. If we're looking at the highways, one of my suggestions would be let's get better lighting along those highways. Whether it's in the summer or the winter, when we look at our abundance of wildlife, when they decide to come out on the road, it's usually a little too late that we actually see them. So let's look at that health and safety. Mr. Schaap had an absolutely outstanding idea. Let's get some more rumble strips out there. I know that if you're coming in from South End into Timmins and you take that bend, and if you're in the right lane, 9 times out of 10 you hit that rumble strip, no matter how good you think you are. It'll wake you up, right? Absolutely a fantastic idea, and yes, that's something that we should look into as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The next question, another audience question, is the Ontario Human Rights Commissioner issued a statement that racism towards First Nation people in our city was considered normalized. If you were elected or member of provincial parliament, what would you do about this? And I'll start with Mr. Génier.
You know what, I mean, we hear the word racism all over, and we've heard it since we were young. It is normalized to a certain extent, unfortunately. You know what, I mean, what would I do? It's all about education. Knowledge is power. If you teach people, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but if you teach people, and I think we're doing good progress on that. I mean, there are words that, you know, our parents would say, our grandparents would say, qualifiers that some would say that just don't exist anymore because they're frowned upon quite severely. So we're doing progress in that. As for the Indigenous community, you know what, I mean, we're looking forward to working with them. And again, about education, when we do open that road and bulldoze that road to the Ring of Fire, we're going to have them working with us. We're going to partner with them. Absolutely.
Mr. Auger?
I'm glad you agree.
Well,
No, I don't agree.
first of all, Mr. Génier, if you want to plow the road up, you got to deal with the First Nations community first. Make sure the environment and all this kind of stuff. And I've been on the board for the Timmins Friendship Center now 15 years. Have you ever been in that building?
In the Native Center?
Yeah.
Nope.
Well, sometime you should go in there and see what it's like, because you'll be surprised. You just walk
All right,
in.
gentlemen. Mr.
Anyway,
Auger?
there is a little bit of prejudice, racism in Timmins. And I think what it is, it's up to the people. When you hear it, stand up and say, that's not right. You don't do that, because it could be a First Nations person. It could be somebody else or whatever. You have to stand up and you have to stop it. Okay? there's no reason for racism today. And I think it's time that the citizens in the community, if you hear it, speak up and put a stop to it, because there's no reason for it. 35, 40 years ago, it was almost normal, but now it's not.
Thank you, Mr. Auger. Mr. Bisson.
Listen, we all have a responsibility when it comes to stopping racism. We see it. We're at the workplace, we're talking to our friends, we're talking to our neighbors, and they say, oh, those darn Indians. It's up to us as individuals to take that on. I had that happen last night, knocking on doors when somebody said, put your sign up, I vote for you, but by the way, those Indians are getting too much. You can't allow that type of stuff to go on, because the reality, we all live in this community, we all live in this province and this country together, and we need to be able to be tolerant of each other. Intolerant breeds nothing but problems. As far as my friend saying taking the bulldozer to the ring of fire and repeating it twice, I was part of the negotiations with De Beers. It took us 4 or 5 years to negotiate an agreement with all of the First Nations community on the James Bay. But can you imagine what would have happened if De Beers would have said, we're going to bulldoze our way to the Victor mine? It wouldn't have just been First Nations out there. There would have been a whole bunch of other citizens from across this province who would have been on the area blockading that from happening. You need to go through processes that respect people, respect the environment, and ensure that development happens in a way that's consistent with the values we all share.
Thank you, Mr. Bisson. Mr. Bauer?
So
Mr. Bauer?
when it comes to this, what Mr. Auger was saying is yes. It first starts with that personal onus, with that personal responsibility. If you hear it, it's up to you to make a change. Secondly, when we look at our post-secondary education, and Mr. Bisson, maybe you can help me out with this one. I didn't do enough reading on it. I'm not sure, but I know at Northern College, one of the courses that we are offering is Indigenous Peoples and Cultures. So to help people understand the past, the current, and the future. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that is a mandatory course. I know that was under consideration. But yes, let's get people to the point that we understand truly what the problem is. Because if we intend to fix any of the problems, we have to understand where it's coming from. And that's the problem that we're facing now. We hear the opposition saying, yes, let's throw money at it. Great. Do you know what the actual problem is? Not really. There's the problem. Understand it first, then you can actually fix it.
Mr. Schaap? I'll get back to you, Mr. Virginia.
My personal stance is racism has no place in day-to-day life or even in the workplace. And like the other people said here, if you hear it, it's your job to simply stand up and say no. Don't do it. Also, I believe that what we need to do is we need to start working in Native and other, like forestry, for instance. We need to do a joint ministry with the natives and the people of the forestry, because who knows more about forestry than the natives? They've been here for thousands of years. They know what lives there, they know the cycle of the animals, they know everything. 9 times out of 10, when you do a clear cut, you actually lose a lot of animals in that clear cut because they have no place to hide, no food or anything to live on, and they live within that certain radius. So if you take that radius, they don't just simply pack up and move to another spot. They try to live where they were born and were hunting. And if they have nothing to live on, that's the problem.
All right. So I have a question here that I feel is, everybody's dying to answer. So the question is, starting with Mr. Auger, the estimated value of the mineral deposits in the Ring of Fire region in northwestern Ontario is in the billions of dollars and stands to provide significant spin-off opportunities for Timmins. However, progress in much of this area has ground to a standstill. What do you propose to do to advance this project?
Go for lunch. Well, I think what we have to do is, this is me sarcastic here. What we have to do is, the Liberals are spending $1 billion on the road to the Ring of Fire. And what you have to do is you have to make sure that you get all the First Nations together to work on it. And when you start working on it, you're looking for a mill. You gotta find out where that's gonna go. It'd be nice if the government in power and you had a representative, the mill would come here, but you never know. In the meantime, the money that's gonna be spent on the Ring of Fire, all that money from those should stay in the north, not go down south to Toronto or Mississauga or whatever. So whatever they take out, the northern communities should get a share of that, and it should stay here, so we can work on our stuff, in healthcare and education for our young people.
Mr. Bisson?
Well, I've worked with Noront, and I've worked with the Cliff Resources and KWG for a number of years, and the big problem was the provincial government went to the mining companies and said, you go negotiate where the road is and you do our job for us. So you said to the mining companies, you go out and figure out how this is all going to work, you figure out the environmental assessment, you figure out the siting of the road, and they left the private industry to do what government should be doing. So I argue this project would have been up and running years ago if we as a province would have said, we will deal with those issues. We will make sure that in building a road or building rail, whatever it takes to get there, is that the province takes its responsibility to be able to do the planning and to do the siting so that you can actually build that and to pay for it. Because at the end of the day, it is a provincial infrastructure project, no different than building a road in southern Ontario. The other thing in regards to the chromite mine that'll come after, the ferrochrome facility, Mayor Black, I'll give him some credit, has done a lot of work in order, along with the Chamber of Commerce, to make the argument why that ferrochrome facility should come to Timmins. I and others have met with them, and we're hoping to get a positive announcement sometime this summer. It's, I think, between us and Sault Ste. Marie, and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you, Mr. Bisson. Mr. Bauer?
So this is one of the points that I'm going to disagree with Jill on, and that is, so when we heard what he was saying, government was putting on private organizations to do the work for government. So what he's effectively saying is, government said, hey, private companies, you know what, you guys figure everything out, but we want the revenues. Now, if this would have been a privatized operation that said, yeah, you know what, we're going to do that, we're going to keep it up north, it would have been done by now, versus the government intervening and controlling the interest in this.
Mr. Shop?
Well, when it comes to doing that, I believe that it should have been already up and running. There's no reason that it could have been up and running. What has happened is that people have become a little stubborn and a little greedy, and also I find that what's the word for it? They're not they're not communicating with people on a level that people would understand. Like what's happening is you're going in, you're talking to the First Nations, and you're telling them what's going to happen. You're not really offering them anything. You're simply saying, we're going to build this mine. We're going to maybe give you some royalties of this mine. That's it. That's all. Take it or leave it. They don't like that. No one likes to be walked in and say, hey, I'm going to come right through your town here, and you have no say over the matter, but I might give you some money to make you happy. No one wants that. And so what's happened is a lot of times people are just not working with each other and working on a proper way to do it. So, sorry.
Mr. Genie?
Well, I think the fact of opening up the Ring of Fire, we're looking at $60 billion that's in there. I mean, with that money, we can do a whole lot of helping northern communities. You know, we can take that out of there. And if we can get that ferrochrome processing plant here in Timmins, it's 350 jobs for 100 years. I mean, we got to think about it this way. In about 5-6 years, if not less, Kidd Creek is closing. That's 600 to 700 quality jobs that are leaving Timmins. So we got to take care of Timmins here. You know, it all comes back to the apprenticeships. We got to start training people, forming, you know, kids that are going to school right now to be ready for this. Because when this happens, and Doug Ford is the only one that said out publicly that we are going to profit share. And so Timmins is going to get whatever comes out of the ground or whatever is cut on the surface, we're going to be able to get money from that. And that's big. That's big because we'll be able to benefit as residents of Timmins.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Bisson. What will you do to lower the tax and regulatory burden for small employers?
Well, I think that the first thing is what business small and large needs is they need certainty. You need to know what the rules are, and you need to know that the rules are stable so that you can do the kind of planning that needs to be done. The second thing you got to do is you got to make sure that people have access to capital. One of the problems that I deal with it a lot with a number of your members and others, there's not a lot of places to be able to go to capitalize yourself when it comes to getting projects online and getting them to move forward. So I think Heritage Fund has tried to do a pretty good job of that. I think we can do a better job of that through Heritage Fund in order to be able to assist those businesses who are trying to invest. And also, I think we need to deal with the manpower shortage. There's a huge problem in this community, as across Northern Ontario, in being able to attract people to work into the jobs that we are creating in Northern Ontario. And it's not because young people don't want to work, it's because there's not enough people to fill those jobs. So we need to do something in order to address that and to make sure that business at the end of the day is able to operate in an environment that allows them to make a profit, because without a profit, you don't run a business.
Mr. Bauer?
So, as I said earlier, one of the defining things that we want to do for the businesses out there is we want to eliminate the corporate tax altogether. We want to eliminate the mandatory registration with colleges of trades. We want the businesses out there to profit and to prosper. And that goes hand in hand with the hydro that we're wanting to cut down. If your hydro cost is lower, obviously that's also going to be more attractive. We know that people are attracted to Northern Ontario. Everybody that's come up here will always say the same thing to you. Jesus, it's beautiful up here. They fall in love with our nature. They fall in love with the people up here, and can you blame them? People up here are absolutely fantastic, except for Jill. No, I'm kidding, Jill. You're a fantastic guy too. We are friends, Jill. We can get the word out there. We know that the businesses want to come, and we want to give them the ability to do that. Once they see that, we know they'll come.
Thank you. Mr. Schaap?
I actually agree that we should probably look at forming some form of incentives for the businesses. I believe that they should also have a hydro reduction, because a lot of businesses require hydro for manufacturing or in any form. Look at lumber mills. They have to require the hydro in order to run the lumber mill. They have run 24/7. They would produce more lumber if they could run at a cheaper rate. Also, same with mining. When it comes to mining ore or smelted, it's all electricity. Same with farming. Not that there's much for farming around here, but for farming, the people require to have fans and vents running in the farms all the time. So I think that hydro should be reduced. I think there should be a big tax credit towards it for the farmers and for anyone that is running a business. And I also believe there should be an employee discount to help with the people, so they will hire more people to man the business. I believe that if the work's there, people will come. And I also believe that if the employer can afford to hire someone full-time, more people will want to work. No one wants to work at a part-time job with no benefits, no nothing, and hope that they're going to be able to live tomorrow or have their paycheck for the next day. Like, everyone's living paycheck to paycheck, and we need to change that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genier?
Well, the PC government said that, or Doug Ford actually said that, we're going to reduce the taxes, the mom and pop shops to 8.7%. We're going to cut the hydro rates to 12%, or by 12%, sorry. And you know what? I mean, we've had a big increase in the past years from $11.60, I believe, to $14. And that made Ontario lose about 50,000 jobs. And here we are thinking that, or knowing that in less than 6 months it's going up by another $1. I know that 34,000 shops or small business owners want to pack up. I've heard of 3 in town here just in the past week that said the taxes are so expensive that they're not making money. So if we keep raising taxes and if we keep having to pay bigger salaries, well, businesses have to cut their staff. They have to cut their employees down. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that everybody in Ontario gets work.
Thank you. Mr. Auger.
The Liberals have our fair hydro plan. It has made energy bills 25% lower on average for families, small businesses and farms, and low-income families, and those rural and remote areas are seeing decreases of 40 to 50%. And as for maybe why they're saying the business is saying the taxes are too high, maybe that's something to do with the city's taxes, because I know the city taxes are very high, and that when you go start a business and it goes up 2 or 3%, you're paying a lot of money on taxes. But don't quote me on that, okay? Because I know a lot of people are upset because they're paying too high taxes on their property, and that's got nothing to do with the government. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
All right, our last question, we'll start with Mr. Bauer. If you could propose a private member's bill, what would you propose?
Wow. Really? And I have a minute to think of this, eh? A private member's bill. It would be to expand our natural resource within Northern Ontario, to expand the rights to that of all the people of Northern Ontario. I think on top of, or actually, no, if you don't mind, I'd like to change that. Now I have actually thought of a private member's bill. I would like to introduce a private member's bill that would allow the Indigenous people that live on the reservations to own their own property on that reservation. Because as property owners, they now all of a sudden have a method that allows them to go to banks to get business loans so that they can start businesses because they now have collateral. That would be the one.
All right,
Thank
you. Mr. Schaap?
I would actually look at putting a bill forward to advance our natural resources. Like I had said earlier, there are over 80 plants for medicinal and food resources within the forest at any given time that could easily be harvested and be sustainable and profitable to the forest companies, so they don't have to mine all year round, or not harvest all year round on the trees, and they wouldn't have to do a clear cut. And at the same token, it would be less invasive to the animals, and we would have more moose, we would have more deer, we would have more animals in general, so the hunting season would be extended. So I believe that's what I would push for, is more of a natural resource expansion.
All right, thank you. Mr. Genier?
I'm going to add, I really like what, I'm sorry, Joseph?
Or Joe, that's good.
Joe, what Joe said about the Indigenous communities. And I'm going to add to that, again, about education. And I sat down with the Construction Association here yesterday. And we got to talking, because that's what I want to do. I want to sit down with people and talk and find out what the people of Timmins want. And if we bring, there's a saying, you guys all know it, it's give me fish, I'll eat today, and show me how to fish and I'll eat every day. And basically, if we take that scenario and we show the Indigenous communities, once that's done, because I understand, because it's federal, that they can't do that, but once that's done, they can go to school and learn how to build their homes and have pride in it, and fix their wells, and be self-sustaining in the sense that they're going to run their communities and they're going to be proud of it.
Mr. Auger?
I agree with Joe. I think what we have to do is go a little further. We have to train them to have jobs in their community, whatever it may be. Start small businesses up there in their community, because the First Nations community are very talented. The stuff that they make is unbelievable. And and tourists would go there and for sure buy stuff, and then you need the train, which they have right now, and from Cochrane to Moosonee. But I think we have to give them a little bit more freedom to do stuff instead of the government telling them what they can do and what they can't do. I think that's the problem there too.
Mr. Bisson.
Colonialism is alive and well, I must say. I agree with my colleagues who talk about giving First Nations the right to own property and to be able to mortgage their houses. But as my friend here pointed out, it's under the Federal Indian Act. And that's why Charlie and I have actually been working with First Nations communities, Mushkegowuk Council, NAN, and others in order to actually get those kinds of changes for that to happen. If I had to put forward a bill, there's two bills that I've done before and I would do again. One is gas price regulation. I'm tired of seeing gas price changes and the way that they are. We need to do something to get that under control. And the other thing is a bill that was put forward by my colleague John Vantoff, and that is to create a Northern Committee so that all bills that affect Northern Ontario from the government or others has the ability to be able to pull that before all Northern members who sit in the legislature, not just New Democrats, not just Liberals, not just Conservative, but all of us, so that we can travel those bills to our communities so that we can hear from people directly about how these particular government bills are going to affect them.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
You're going to freeze those gas prices for longer than 90 days this time, though, right?
Okay.
You have to regulate. You have to regulate.
So I'd now like to ask the candidates to provide their 2-minute closing statements in reverse order from the opening statement. So we'll start with Mr. Bisson.
Well, this election, my friends, comes down to a couple of things. The Liberals, as we can see with the polling numbers, are, they're probably not going to get reelected. I wouldn't be so bold to predict the outcome, but if you look at the polls, they're pretty well all in the same direction. The Liberals are, going the opposite way, as they say. This election is about who do you want to replace the Liberals? Who do you want as Premier? Do you want Mr. Ford? I don't think so. I think Mr. Ford is showing himself to be a person who, quite frankly, decides that he's going to help those at the top, not those at the bottom, and is also an individual that I think, quite frankly, has his own problems. You've got 30 Conservative candidates who are, at this point, being investigated by Elections Ontario for a scandal having to do with the theft of data of the 407 that they're using in order to be able to canvass people in those ridings, and not to say of others. Andrea Horwath is saying you don't have to choose between bad and worst. You don't have to choose between the Liberals or the Tories. You can choose the change you want. I'm asking you on June 7th to vote for Gilles Bisson, vote for Andrea Horwath, and let's get this province going again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bisson. Mr. Auger, closing statements.
Okay. We need someone to focus on for services such as healthcare and education, our infrastructure needs, our people, especially our seniors and our youth. The PCs on the right want to cut 6% of the Ontario budget. That means massive cuts to healthcare, education, and essential services. The NDP proposed flawed plan doesn't account for $1.6 million. We can't allow them to recklessly throw around taxpayers' money like that. Instead of reckless cuts and irresponsible spending, let's focus on improving our service, our infrastructure, improving the lives of the people in our community. We have to all work as a team, no matter what happens on this election. And on June 7th, vote for Mickey Auger. We'll speak up for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Auger. Mr. Genier, your closing statement.
In a perfect world, we're all going to work together. But we all know that that's kind of, it can happen, but that takes a lot of time. Folks, you've heard 5 different perspectives here tonight. If you understand that money makes the world go around and that it does not grow on trees like the NDP and the Liberals would have you believe, and that the people lending money to Ontario are starting to panic, and that multinationals are on the verge of pulling out from investing in the province, just like they did when NDP Bob Rae was Premier, then I ask you to vote Conservative. And if you think that our veterans have earned our respect by putting their life on the line for us to be here in a democratic debate, and that a poppy is a symbol of remembering those sacrifices in our not landfill, as an NDP radical candidate has suggested, then I ask you to vote Conservative. And if you believe that Timmins, if you believe in Timmins becoming an even greater force to be reckoned with in the mining world and in forestry and so much more, then I ask you to vote Conservative. Your vote will only matter for Timmins if you vote for a candidate that is on the side of power at Queen's Park. Gilles has 28 years to prove himself. Under his watch, we lost mines, we lost mills, and we lost 58,000 jobs. So it's time we start investing in Ontario, but more importantly, it's time we start investing in the people of Timmins. It's time we bring back good paying jobs here and let Northerners keep more of their hard-earned cash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jamie. We'll now hear closing remarks from Mr. Shah.
Well, as we've heard from our previous candidates, we have 5 different perspectives on what's going to go forward. Doug Ford has promised over $25 billion, and he hasn't explained where this $25 billion is going to come from. Like he says, we'll worry about it when I get elected. The NDP are opening up the borders. They want to bring in everyone for healthcare, so our healthcare system's already taxed. They want to open it up. You got the Liberals, which quite frankly have cut off all funding to the healthcare system and have left us dry. And we've lost 5,000 nurses and doctors just within Northern Ontario alone. So what I'm proposing to do is everyone's promising that they're going to come forward to Northern Ontario. Well, I'm going to hold them to account in the sense that every time they vote on a bill, every time they put something forward, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to do the pros and the cons of it. I'm going to present it to people of Timmins, and I'm going to ask the people of Timmins, would you have voted the way that your MPP voted? And if not, I'm going to take that to the MPP and go, why are you going against your riding? Why are you going against your constituents? They obviously are not in support of this. I'm going to make you guys accountable to your ridings, and I'm going to make the leaders answer these questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Closing comments from Mr. Bauer.
Thank you very much. Gary, game on. So I'll give you my cell number. Get a hold of me whenever you need it. Okay, so tonight you've heard the positions on various issues that are going to affect you. You now have the information that you need to make an informed decision and decide who you feel would best serve you at Queen's Park. So just to recap, the PC party, who hasn't come out with an official platform, and they do like to jump from platform to platform. They take a little from here, a little from there, and a little from there. So without the official platform in writing, what you're going to likely see is that few, if any, of these campaign promises are kept. And the ones that are kept will certainly benefit Doug Ford and his friends more than they're going to benefit you and me. The Liberals have promised to continue to spend their money based on the recent history, increase costs to you and me while making our day-to-day living that much more difficult. While I respect the NOP for their position on Northern Ontario, they simply don't have enough people running in the campaign to make the difference at Queen's Park. Even if all 15 were elected, we see how little Toronto actually cares about the North at this moment. While I understand that Jill's been your representative for the last 20 years, and I have worked with him on various advocacy issues in the past at Queen's Park, you have to ask yourself, what has the NDP accomplished for you lately? I've shown you all a way that allows you to choose what is best for you when it comes to health care, how the Libertarian Party will make a true difference on your hydro bills, and at the same time show you that we will actually increase jobs and opportunities for small businesses and non-government alternatives to come to Timmins. I've also shown how we intend to keep the government in check with sunset, recall, and referendum legislation, putting you in power of your government. So in closing, I just all want to ask you, regardless of what your choice is. Please vote this June the 7th. I would like to quote a colleague of mine who recently said, "Vote like your livelihood depends on it, because it just might." Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. On behalf of the Timmins Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to thank all the candidates for participating in this event, and to you, the audience, for attending, and for those watching at home at yourplacetowatch.com. It is important to hear about the provincial issues in this election, and we appreciate everyone having taken the time to be part of this conversation. If you're interested in provincial issues, I'd like to remind everyone that the Chamber is hosting a pre-election conversation with Ontario Chamber President Rocco Rossi at Full Beard next Monday. To register, please contact the Timmins Chamber of Commerce. Thank you again for attending, and be sure to vote.
Here.